Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy A71 and see how this specific device holds up in 2022. Now this phone originally came out in 2019, so it's definitely not the latest and greatest anymore, but it did come out in the later part of 2019, and I don't even think I got my hands on it until 2020. And what's very interesting about this device is that we've actually gotten a few successors to this phone, and to be honest, I still think it's a very interesting device that Samsung has made. It's still fairly popular, and their A series of devices are still some of my favorite, phones that Samsung has ever made. I think they're very great. I think they have a lot of quality within them, and the more I look at the future of Samsung, the more and more I see their A lineup growing, and I definitely do think as of right now they are super happy that they made the A lineup in general. If you want to pick up some of their phones from their A lineup or some other phones I'd recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the Galaxy A71, on the front, we do have a 6.7-inch Super AMOLED Plus display. Now with this type of panel, as I've mentioned before, these type of screens that Samsung makes just in general are very, very good. This one is still kind of decent, but for a budget phone, it's totally understandable. I think with that, 1080p display they put on this thing, it was pretty good in 2019, and you have to remember this phone was kind of announced before they even started creating the 120Hz panels on their Samsung devices. We didn't get it until like the S20, which was just a few months after this, so 60Hz still here, totally okay, and the panel with the hole punch display on a budget tier phone, it's actually pretty interesting that Samsung made a phone like this for this type of price tag, and they've only gotten better since then, which is really good to see. And again, if you want their flagship, you go for the Ultra lineup or the Plus lineup. If you're okay with saving a little bit of money, then this is still pretty decent in my opinion. Now you have that hole punch display too, which is really nice. You do have USB Type-C on this thing, which is really, really cool. No Samsung DeX, but I still think that's totally okay. You also have a micro SD card slot on this phone as well, and that is the type of I/O that I really do miss nowadays. I wish our phones had that type of capability. Unfortunately, we no longer have it on pretty much all of our phones. I think there are still some A lineup devices that have it, but as of right now, that is not quite the case. So in terms of the overall sides and the top of this phone, that's kind of it. But on the back, we do have a very interesting plastic back on this thing. Now some of these A70 series, kind of had an interesting type of layout on the back, which I kind of liked. I think they look pretty good for the most part. Another big thing with this type of A series is we had a very, very interesting camera setup. Now I will talk about the cameras in a second. I never really understood why Samsung puts so many random cameras on their device when they don't even put them on their main series of devices, but most people will look at this type of phone and they'll be like, oh, it has way more cameras or just as many cameras as their Ultra lineup, so it has to be good. Not quite the case, but they're kind of hitting a different demographic there. So in terms of the body, definitely not the most premium feeling thing in the world, but it still looks pretty good. And again, you know what you're getting when you're getting a device like this. It's not supposed to be the most premium thing in the world. It's supposed to be something there that's fairly cheaper. Now we also had an inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display as well, which was really cool too. So you can forget about those things. In terms of the body, that kind of covers it up. Now in terms of the actual camera setup, like I mentioned, quadruple camera setup. You had a 64 megapixel wide angle lens, 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, 5 megapixel macro lens, then a 5 megapixel depth camera. Now personally, the last two cameras that I mentioned, the macro and depth lens, I don't really care for too much. I love the ultra wide sensor, and I'm super happy this thing had an ultra wide sensor, but I will never understand why Samsung puts such high megapixel cameras inside of their budget phones. 64 megapixel wide angle lens, I'm not too sure why you'd even need those many megapixels to be honest, but the 12 megapixel ultra wide is still perfectly fine. Now I'm not going to say this camera is the best camera of all time, because it really isn't. I think everybody kind of knows what they're getting, again, when you get a phone like this, but for their budget tier offerings, this is a pretty decent offering, I will say. You do have the ability of shooting 4K videos on the back, and you have 4K video recording on the front as well with a 32 megapixel wide angle lens. I don't know why they put such high megapixel count for these cameras, but I do like the fact that they, kind of give us a lot of different capability within these types of cameras. And I think that in and of itself is really cool. I love Samsung for kind of, thinking outside of the box sometimes with their bottom tier A series, with their A1 devices. Definitely not the most premium things in the world either, but I like these type of cameras because they give us a little glimpse of what Samsung is going to be doing in the future. I know they're going to be bringing 4K at 60 on the front and the back for their A7 devices in the future, which they've already kind of done. I know they're going to be improving the cameras, and to be honest, if I look at something like a Galaxy S9, which was a flagship in 2018, and I look at the A71, which is somewhat of a budget phone, I think this camera fares fairly well against those ones, to be honest. So in terms of the camera setup, I will say it's a thumbs up for me. Now in terms of software, this thing did start off with Android 10. I think right now it is on Android 12, or it's going to be getting Android 12 very, very soon. And the thing with the A series devices is it's kind of on the back burner of software updates. If you like One UI, then this is perfect for you. If you don't like One UI, then you'll at least like long software updates that Samsung does. They give you a lot of software updates too. Like every single day I open any of my Samsung device, I have like random updates I can install if I want to. So I think that's really cool in and of itself. However, it really doesn't make a crazy amount of sense to go ahead and buy something like a Galaxy A71 if you want a super long lasting phone. It may make a little bit more sense if you buy the newer A series devices, one that came out maybe last year or this year. That may make a little bit more sense for some people too, but I do like the software updates that we're getting on something like a Galaxy A71, so I still think as of right now, still perfectly fine, but we do have to look towards the future and kind of improve in that way as well. So in terms of software, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the actual performance of this phone, the Galaxy A71 has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 730 chipset in some areas. Most areas it has that chipset, 730G in other ones. It has the Adreno 618 GPU, and it has 6GB of RAM on the base model and 8GB of RAM on the top tier model. Now one thing to keep in mind with the Samsung Galaxy A series of devices is that the performance is never going to be better than their flagships of that time. The Galaxy S10 of those times definitely had better performance and everything than the Galaxy A series you're getting now, but I do like that Samsung again kind of puts a lot of different features of their phones, and things kind of look and seem a little bit better than you would actually probably recognize. So with that being said, the Galaxy A71's performance is better than you would expect. Definitely not that amazing, but even now in 2022, I still think it's actually fairly decent. If you're going through and you're doing, random small different types of, use cases like that, if you're just, calling people, going on Snapchat, Instagram, different things like that, it's going to be perfectly fine for the most part. You're really not going to feel like you have a very outdated or super old performing phone. When you start taking it up a notch and you start looking at things like the heavier intensive gaming and, maybe playing Genshin Impact, those games are probably going to start showing the speed of this thing. But like I mentioned, because we are in a situation where most games that we go ahead and install, we can modify the graphics and tune them up or down, but we can actually go ahead and kind of look in that direction, and we can actually go ahead and, tune the graphics down if we want to. So that's another really big advantage of something like the games that we have nowadays. Before, maybe we didn't really have that, but now we have that capability, which is cool in and of itself. So when it comes down to the performance, it gets a thumbs up for me, and especially in the battery standpoint, this phone gets a thumbs up for me. 4,500 mAh battery on this device. That is another big advantage of some type of device like this. So in my opinion, if you're getting a phone like this, that is a big advantage. Having a battery that's this great, I think just gets a thumbs up for me, and I look forward to a phone that has this type of battery over time. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I think this phone is worth it if you already have it. I don't think it's a bad phone at all, but if you're planning on getting a phone at some point, it may make sense to go ahead and get something newer. I think the A series of devices are great, but just because Samsung doesn't throw in the most amount of, features and everything in these types of devices, it just makes a little bit more sense to go down the road of purchasing maybe one of the newer A series, maybe A73 or whatever one there's available now. It may make a little bit more sense to go down that route, but I would still say the A71 is a great phone, and I think when it first came out and even now, it's still a pretty good phone for sure. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.